The pregnancy test fell from my trembling hands onto the cracked bathroom tiles of my Brooklyn studio apartment. Two pink lines stared back at me like tiny accusers, and I knew my life had just shattered into a million pieces. The father, my married boss, Richard Sterling, who'd been whispering sweet lies in my ear for 8 months while his wife planned their anniversary vacation. I pressed my back against the cold bathroom wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. 26 years old, barely making rent as a receptionist at Sterling and Associates law firm, and now carrying the child of a man who'd probably fire me the moment he found out. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd grown up in church, knew better, but desperation and loneliness had clouded my judgment. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Beautiful. Wife's at her sister's again." The casual way he mentioned his wife made my stomach turn. How had I become this person? The other woman, the secret, the mistake that would ruin his perfect life and destroy mine. Thunder rumbled outside my window as rain began pelting the fire escape. The storm felt fitting. Everything was about to come crashing down. I had $247 in my bank account, no family to turn to since Mom died 2 years ago, and now a baby growing inside me whose father would never claim him. But what I didn't know yet was that this moment, sitting on my bathroom floor with mascara streaming down my cheeks, would become the catalyst for the most incredible journey of my life. A journey that would test my faith, break my heart, and ultimately lead me to a love so pure and unexpected that I'd wonder if God himself had orchestrated every painful step. The next morning, I stared at my reflection in the office bathroom mirror, trying to hide the evidence of a sleepless night. My eyes were puffy, and my usual confident smile felt forced. How was I supposed to face Richard, knowing what I knew? How was I supposed to pretend everything was normal when my entire world had shifted overnight? The law firm buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy. Phones ringing, attorneys rushing between meetings, the scent of expensive coffee mixing with copy machine toner. I'd worked here for 2 years, ever since moving to Brooklyn from a small town in Ohio, chasing dreams that seemed increasingly foolish now. This isn't just my story, it's a story about second chances, about finding hope in the darkest moments, and about discovering that sometimes what feels like the end is actually just the beginning. It's about faith, forgiveness, and the kind of love that doesn't judge your past, but believes in your future. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, because what happened next would test every belief I thought I had about myself, about love, and about God's plan for broken people like me. Richard's office smelled like leather and ambition, just like always. But today, the familiar scent made me nauseous, whether from morning sickness or pure anxiety. I couldn't tell. He looked up from his case files with that charming smile that had gotten me into this mess. His silver hair perfectly styled, his wedding ring catching the afternoon light streaming through his corner office windows. "Claire, you look pale. Everything all right?" His voice carried that concerned tone he'd perfected over our months together, the one that made me feel special, chosen. Now it just sounded calculating. I closed the door behind me, my hands shaking as I approached his massive mahogany desk. "We need to talk," I whispered, glancing toward the glass walls that separated us from the bustling law firm. His secretary, Margaret, was typing away at her desk, completely unaware that I was about to detonate a bomb that would change everything. Richard's expression shifted from concern to wariness. He'd been married long enough to recognize those words. "I'm pregnant, Richard." The words tumbled out before I could lose my nerve. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. His hands, usually so steady during depositions, began trembling as he reached for his coffee cup, then thought better of it. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside, I could hear the distant honking of Brooklyn traffic, the rhythm of a city that kept moving while my world stood completely still. Richard's eyes darted to his family photo, his wife Linda with her perfectly styled blonde hair, their twin daughters in private school uniforms, the golden retriever, the Connecticut mansion, everything he stood to lose. Are you ... are you certain? He finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I pulled the pregnancy test from my purse, still in its plastic bag, and placed it on his desk between the legal briefs and his Mont Blanc pen set. The evidence was undeniable. Richard buried his face in his hands, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. This can't be happening. Linda and I, we're going to Bermuda next week for our 20th anniversary. The girls have that piano recital. I'm up for partner, ... double quotes. His voice trailed off as the reality crashed over him like a tidal wave. What are we going to do? I asked, hating how small and desperate I sounded. But Richard's next words cut through me like shattered glass. Claire, there is no we. There never was. You knew I was married. You knew this was just ... casual. Casual. 8 months of stolen moments, whispered promises, late nights in hotels when he told his wife he was working late. 8 months of believing that what we had was special, that maybe someday he'd choose me. The naivety of it all hit me like a physical blow. I need you to handle this, he said, reaching for his checkbook. Quietly, discreetly. I'll cover all the expenses. Of course. But this situation needs to disappear before anyone finds out. His offer hung in the air between us like poison. I stared at this man I thought I loved, seeing him clearly for the first time, not as my salvation, but as my destruction. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table with a blank piece of paper, my hands trembling as I tried to find words for the unforgivable. How do you apologize for destroying a 20-year marriage? How do you explain to a woman you've never met that you've been sleeping with her husband while she planned anniversary dinners and helped her daughters with homework? Dear Mrs. Sterling, I began, then crumpled the paper and started again. Dear Linda felt too familiar. After 6 drafts, I finally wrote, Mrs. Sterling, my name is Claire Davis, and I owe you the most sincere apology of my life. What I did was inexcusable. I knew Richard was married, and I pursued the relationship anyway. The words felt inadequate, but I continued, I want you to know that he spoke of you and your daughters with love and respect. That doesn't excuse what we did, but you deserved to know the truth from me, not through gossip. I take full responsibility for my actions and the pain I've caused your family. I sealed the letter with shaking hands. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling and Associates an hour early. Margaret wasn't at her desk yet, so I gathered the courage to do something I should have done months ago. I walked through the office, stopping at each colleague's desk to leave a handwritten note of apology for the disruption and scandal I'd brought to their workplace. When Margaret arrived, I was waiting by her desk with coffee and a letter. Margaret, I need you to know how sorry I am. You've been nothing but kind to me, and I've brought shame to this office. I understand if you can't forgive me, but I wanted you to hear it from me directly. Her face was unreadable as she accepted the letter. Richard arrived 20 minutes later, his face haggard and his usually perfect appearance disheveled. He barely glanced at me, but I could see the weight of his crumbling life in his shoulders. Linda had taken the girls to her mother's house. The Connecticut mansion felt empty. His career hung by a thread. My last day became a study in consequences. Colleagues who once chatted with me about weekend plans now avoided eye contact. The copy machine technician, who used to joke about the weather, turned his back when I approached. I wasn't just losing a job, I was losing my entire social world. But the hardest moment came when I overheard two junior associates in the break room. Can you imagine being Linda Sterling right now? 20 years of marriage, two teenage daughters, and finding out your husband was cheating with his secretary? I heard she's seeing a therapist now. The casual discussion of devastation I'd caused made me sick. By noon, security had escorted me out with my cardboard box, but not before I'd mailed the letter to Linda Sterling. Standing on the sidewalk, I realized that apologizing was only the first step. The real work, rebuilding my life, raising this baby, finding redemption, that was going to take everything I had. That evening, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside, Margaret's handwriting, Claire. What you did was wrong, but the fact that you took responsibility shows character. I pray you find your way. It was the first glimmer of grace I'd received, and I cried myself to sleep, clutching that note like a lifeline. 3 days after Sarah hung up on me, my world exploded. I arrived at work to find Margaret at my desk, packing my personal belongings into a cardboard box. Her usual warm smile was replaced by a look of disgust that made my stomach drop to my feet. "Mr. Sterling wants to see you immediately," she said coldly, not meeting my eyes. The walk to Richard's office felt like a funeral march. Every employee I passed seemed to stop their conversations and stare. The whispers followed me down the hallway like ghosts. Can you believe it? With a married man? His poor wife, ... My cheeks burned with shame as I realized my secret was out. Richard sat behind his desk like a judge preparing to deliver a death sentence. His usually immaculate appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, his hair mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Sit down, Claire," he commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth or familiarity. "Someone called Linda," he said without preamble, his eyes hard as steel. "Someone told my wife about us, about your ... condition. She's filing for divorce. My daughters won't speak to me. 20 years of marriage, destroyed because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I'd only confided in one person, but the words died in my throat. Richard's life was imploding, and somehow it was all my fault. "You're terminated, effective immediately," he continued. "Security will escort you out. Don't expect a reference. Don't expect severance. You've cost me everything." The security guard, Tony, whom I'd chatted with every morning for 2 years, couldn't meet my eyes as he walked me to the elevator. The cardboard box felt heavier with each step, containing the remnants of a life I'd built in Brooklyn desk plants, coffee mugs, photos from office parties where I'd smiled innocently, not knowing how dramatically everything would change. Standing on the sidewalk outside Sterling and Associates with my box of belongings, I felt completely untethered from reality. Cars honked in the distance, people hurried past with their own important lives, but I was invisible, a ghost haunting the streets of Brooklyn with nowhere to go and no one to call. Back in my apartment, I opened my laptop to check my bank account and felt my heart stop. $1,847. After rent, utilities, and groceries, I had maybe 2 months before I'd be evicted. No job, no references, no friends, no family, just me, a growing baby, and the crushing weight of having destroyed 2 families, Richard's, and my own unborn child's. That night, I sat on my fire escape in the October chill, watching Brooklyn twinkle below me like scattered diamonds. For the first time since leaving Ohio, I felt truly alone in this massive city. The baby books I'd secretly bought said the fetus was the size of a raspberry, now developing tiny fingers and toes while I fell apart. I thought about my mother, about how disappointed she'd be if she could see me now. She'd raised me with strong values, taught me right from wrong, but somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself in the loneliness of city life. As tears froze on my cheeks in the cold night air, I made a decision that terrified me. It was time to find my way back to the God I'd abandoned, even though I wasn't sure he'd want anything to do with me now. The Brooklyn Baptist Church on Flatbush Avenue looked nothing like the small white chapel of my childhood in Ohio. Its red brick facade and modern glass doors seemed intimidating as I stood across the street, gathering courage I wasn't sure I possessed. 3 weeks had passed since I'd lost my job, and desperation had finally driven me to seek the one thing I'd abandoned years ago: faith. My hands shook as I climbed the stone steps, wearing the only dress that still fit over my growing belly. At 12 weeks pregnant, I was starting to show, and every mirror reflected back a stranger hollow-eyed, thin everywhere except my middle, a walking testament to poor choices and broken dreams. The sanctuary was larger than I'd expected, filled with families and couples who looked so put together, so blessed. I slipped into a back pew, hoping to remain invisible, but a woman with graying hair and kind eyes immediately scooted over to make room. "First time here, honey," she whispered with a smile that reminded me achingly of my mother. Pastor Williams took the pulpit with an energy that commanded attention. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with laugh lines around his eyes and a warmth that seemed to reach every corner of the massive room. "Today we're talking about second chances," he began, and I felt like God himself was speaking directly to me. "Some of you think you've messed up too badly for redemption," Pastor Williams continued, his voice growing stronger. "You think your mistakes have written a story that can't be rewritten. But I'm here to tell you that our God specializes in impossible situations. He takes broken pieces and creates masterpieces." Tears began streaming down my cheeks. After the service, the kind woman who'd made room for me introduced herself as Miss Dorothy. She was 68, had been attending this church for 30 years, and had an intuition about people that felt almost supernatural. "You look like you're carrying more than just that sweet baby," she said gently, placing a weathered hand on my arm. Something about her maternal presence broke down every wall I'd built around my heart. Standing in the church parking lot, I found myself telling this stranger everything about Richard, about the affair, about losing my job, about feeling completely alone in a city of millions. Dorothy listened without judgment, nodding with understanding that felt like a warm embrace. "Honey, you're not the first woman to make mistakes, and you won't be the last," she said when I finished. "But you're here now, and that means you're ready to let God turn this mess into a message. Would you like to have coffee with me this week? I think you need some mothering, and I've got plenty to give." That coffee meeting turned into regular Tuesday afternoon visits to Dorothy's cozy apartment in Park Slope. She'd lived in Brooklyn her whole life, raised 4 children as a single mother after her husband died young, and somehow managed to maintain an unshakable faith through every storm. Her kitchen became my sanctuary, filled with the smell of fresh-baked cookies and unconditional love. "God's not finished with your story, Claire," she told me during one of our talks, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. "This baby isn't a mistake. He's a miracle waiting to unfold. You just need to trust the process and let the Lord work. For the first time in months, sitting in Dorothy's kitchen with my hands on my growing belly, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: hope. By my 5th month of pregnancy, Dorothy had become more than a friend. She was the mother figure I desperately needed. She accompanied me to doctor's appointments, helped me apply for government assistance, and most importantly, helped me find a part-time job at a small accounting firm in her neighborhood. The work was simple: filing, data entry, answering phones, but it gave me dignity and enough money to survive. It was at Dorothy's church that I first noticed Marcus Thompson. He sang in the choir, his rich baritone voice carrying hymns that touched my soul in ways I hadn't expected. Tall and lean, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he had an air of quiet strength that drew me in. Dorothy noticed my attention and smiled knowingly. "Marcus is good people," she told me after service one Sunday. "Lost his wife Sarah to cancer 3 years ago. Been raising his 8-year-old daughter Emma by himself. He's a teacher at the middle school, coaches basketball, and has a heart bigger than Brooklyn itself. But he's been carrying that grief like a stone in his chest." Her concern for him was genuine. My first real conversation with Marcus happened during the church's monthly community dinner. I was helping serve food, my rounded belly now impossible to hide at 6 months pregnant, when he approached with his daughter Emma, a precocious little girl with pigtails and her father's gentle eyes. "Miss Dorothy says you're new to Brooklyn," Marcus said, his voice warm but carefully measured. "How are you finding church life?" There was no judgment in his tone, no curious glances at my obvious pregnancy, just genuine interest. Emma chattered about school while Marcus listened with the practiced patience of single fatherhood. Over the following weeks, Marcus began seeking me out after services for brief conversations about scripture and Brooklyn life. But I noticed the shadow that crossed his face whenever someone mentioned his late wife Sarah. The way his jaw tightened when Emma asked why Mommy couldn't come back from heaven. The breaking point came during Emma's school play. I'd offered to help with costumes, and Marcus invited me to attend. But when Emma forgot her lines and began crying on stage, Marcus froze completely. I watched this strong man crumble as his daughter's tears triggered memories of hospital rooms and final goodbyes. "I can't do this," he whispered to me in the school auditorium, his hands shaking. Sarah would have known what to do. She would have prepared Emma better, would have been backstage encouraging her. "I'm failing her every single day." The raw pain in his voice broke my heart. Without thinking, I took his hand and squeezed it gently. "You're not failing her, Marcus. You're human. Emma doesn't need you to be perfect. She needs you to be present, and you are." That night, sitting in his living room while Emma slept, Marcus finally broke down and told me about the nightmares, the guilt, the fear that he'd never be enough for his daughter. "Claire, I'm attracted to you, but I'm terrified," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't love someone new without betraying Sarah's memory? What if Emma gets attached to you and loses another mother figure?" I've been praying about this for weeks, but God feels silent. For the first time, I realized that love after loss required a courage I was only beginning to understand. Standing in the maternity ward of Brooklyn Methodist Hospital 2 years after meeting Marcus, holding my newborn twin boys while my husband filled out their birth certificates, I marveled at how completely God had rewritten my story. Baby Thompson A and Baby Thompson B were about to officially become Isaiah Marcus Thompson and Daniel James Thompson, names we'd chosen together, carrying both biblical significance and family honor. My first son, Caleb, now 16 months old and toddling through the hospital halls, calling Marcus's daddy, had been legally adopted by Marcus 3 months after our wedding. We'd married when Caleb was 6 months old, and Marcus had insisted on the adoption immediately after our honeymoon. Love makes a family, Marcus always said, not DNA. Caleb would grow up knowing his story, but also knowing he was chosen and wanted. This journey taught me that sometimes what looks like the end of your story is actually just God closing one chapter to begin a better one. That small Baptist church in Brooklyn became the foundation of everything beautiful in my life. It gave me faith, community, a husband who loves unconditionally, and children who will grow up knowing they're wanted and chosen. If you're reading this from your own rock bottom, wondering if redemption is possible, let my story be proof that it absolutely is. God's love doesn't discriminate based on your past mistakes, and His plans for your future are more beautiful than anything you could imagine for yourself. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs hope today. In the comments, let me know what city and country you're watching from. I love connecting with people around the world who believe in second chances.